everybody. It's Suzette Standring. Thank you for joining me on It's All Right with Suzette, a half-hour show on the craft of writing. And today we are shining a light on stand-up comedy and the humor books written by Leighann Lord. She is fiercely funny, award-winning, and is good at everything. She wrote the pilot for the Chris Rock Show. She hosts her podcast series, People with Parents. She's a headliner at comedy shows and posts hilarious takes on historical moments and her cat on Instagram. Oh, and did I tell you that she was the former co-host of the Emmy-nominated show Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson? Welcome, Leighann Lord.
Suzette, thank you so much. I just have to say, just to correct the record, I was one of the writers for the pilot of the Chris Rock Show. If anyone's written for TV, you know it's not a one-person job. It's a very, very hard job, which is why I didn't last at it. But yeah, no, so I was one of an amazing team of people who put that together.
Well, the fact is you were one of them, and that is a rarefied realm. So
yeah, thank you.
You could have written it, I'm sure. You know, I have to say, Leighann, you don't look old enough to have accomplished all that. So you are slurping long and hard from the fountain of youth, my friend.
You know, it is definitely genetic. You know, we have that. My dad used to call it the Lena Horne gene, you know, that having that youthful appearance for so long. But it also helps to kind of get a good night's sleep and know when to de-stress, because those things, not getting enough sleep, having a lot of stress, those things will age you significantly. So I got a good foundation, but you got to still maintain.
I have a Fitbit that tracks my sleep, and I'm only still on fair. But let's talk about one of your books, Real Women Do It Standing Up, Stories from the Career of a Very Funny Lady. Tell us what readers can look forward to and what made you write it.
Oh goodness. I got to tell you, I didn't start out writing a book. I started out writing blogs, you know, and just, you know, and the stories about me traveling and being a comic and being at the time married and having a dog at the time. And before I knew it, I looked up, I guess maybe a couple years in, and went, oh, that's a book. I just sort of stumbled into it. And so I sort of pulled the essays together, and again, very much inspired by Irma Bombeck, you know, and her, you know, growing up reading her essays, which she put into a book. So I feel like I was traveling that Irma path in my own way. And I think people can look forward to getting a behind the scenes look on what it's like as I was learning my craft and then applying my craft and then trying to work and have a life. You know, they were separate things that, you know, we all have to learn how to do together. So I think if you enjoy comedy, people will enjoy reading the book and getting that behind the scenes look and that sort of peek into my personal life that you may not get if we're not, you know, close.
And, you know, I think that probably in the life of a performer like you do so much stand-up comedy and appearances. How did you hone in on the stories that you actually featured?
Well, they sort of suggested themselves to me. And when I put the book together, you know, there were some stories that were about me in a comedy club or being on the road or backstage, and that's sort of how the stories got organized. That's literally the format. You know, there's in the club, on the road, backstage, true stories. The last section is called Under the Influence, which allowed me to be a little bit of a catch-all category. So there's definitely a through line to how the stories are grouped.
Well, you know, you said something that's interesting to me. It's not just funny stories that happen to you on the road, but you managing your time, your life, trying to find a balance and a real insider's look into what it takes to be a stand-up comedian. So in some ways, is your book also instructive to those who aspire to do stand-up?
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. You know, especially those things people don't think about. You know, when you decide to pursue stand-up, you know, or work for yourself, you know, it's a similar idea. You know, what are you giving up? You know, what does that mean when you're on the road? That means you're missing family functions sometimes, you know, or you can't just randomly take a day off because if you're not working, you're not earning. You know, there was a point where my family would let me know a year in advance. Like, oh, okay, Leighann, we're engaged. Here's the date. Like, you had to tell me in advance so I could, you know, take that time off. And also, and this is a silly thing, when you become a comic and you know you meet people and they don't know, the minute they find out you're a comic, they stop taking you seriously. like, we were having this wonderful conversation and you just think I'm being funny and delightful in the moment. And then like, oh, you do this professionally. And then they sort of sit back and they want you to like, okay, be funny on command. And it's like, well, it's less fun.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's really so many rich insights into the world that you do. Now, that's something that I'm really curious about. When you are doing stand-up, people don't realize how time consuming it is, right?
No.
They don't. And so when you were going full throttle before the pandemic, how often were you gone from home?
Well, I would even set it back a little further because even before the pandemic, I sort of got pulled in a little bit to having a caregiver role for my parents. So my high was a little bit before the pandemic, and I I began to feel as if home was the place I visited. That's where my clothes were. That's where I did laundry. All my belongings. But I can't even quantify it because when you add it up, it's sort of like, oh, that's a lot. But I was traveling and I was enjoying myself because I love traveling. I'm on my second passport, additional pages. That was enjoyable for me to be on the road. But early in my career, I performed at colleges, and that would take me out. And have me on the road consistently. And then I did cruise ships, which would take me out on the water. And I did that for 10 years. And then I went overseas to do shows for the troops. So I think I've had a very active travel life. And one of the things I'm really proud of is I have performed in all 50 states.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Once I started traveling, that was a goal because I would buy the little magnets at the gift shop in the shape of the states and put them on my refrigerator. So I was just building this map of the United States on my refrigerator.
What was it like to perform before U.S. troops in the Middle East?
Oh my gosh. The first time I did it, I've done several tours. The first time I did it, I went out in 2002, which was really early. They actually had a hard time getting people to say yes because it was all so new. And I'm like, at the time I got married a year ago, and I'm like, if I could be married, I could go to a war zone. What's the difference? I'll be fine. But they are, and many performers have said this. They are one of the best audiences you could ever perform for. They are so grateful that they have not been forgotten because things are a little different now because they have more access to electronic communications, but that also depends on the base you're on. Sometimes they restrict that and you're not allowed to email at will or text or anything like that. And then being far from home, it's hard, and the soldiers are younger than you could imagine. You can sign up when you're 18 and then you see what 18 looks like in a uniform. And it's like, I would go up to them. I'm like, does your mom know you're here? Like, can I just take you back home? What are you doing here? So they're very appreciative and they give you the best that they have, even if the best that they have at a forward operating base is a tent and a cot, so there's some roughing it, but it's totally worth it.
I'm sure you provided a beautiful escape for them. Your stand-up comedy has been described as hilarious, elegant, and classy. I do personally love your wit. I'm very drawn to everything that you do. And you did a great set on Dry Bar Comedy, which is known for clean comedy, which sometimes feels like the exception rather than the rule.
It kind of is.
Why is clean comedy more hard to write, or is it harder to perform clean comedy?
It can be. I mean, understand, this is the ground zero of free speech, so to speak. Stand-up comedy grew up in clubs and nightclubs where you could say whatever you want. Now, on the other end of that is television, where, before cable, you couldn't just say anything you want. So there is a distinction. There's, I guess, corporate clean is what we would call it, or television clean. And depending on where you want to go in your career, you have to be able to do that. I do think it's a little bit harder to choose your words and your topics. But it's a skill, and Dry Bar saw a market. They are based in Provo, Utah, and it's not just clean comedy, it's Provo clean. Like it's very, like, I'm generally clean.
Like Mormon stamped comedy.
Yes, absolutely. Like in the club where I taped it, they don't serve alcohol. You can get candy You can have sugar, but you can't have alcohol. So
Wow.
it was an interesting experience for even for me to go, okay, what do I say to these people? And just I'd love to share this little tidbit to just to give you how let you know how strict they are. You can't even say, "Oh my God,"
Whoa.
which is just a cast off phrase for us. It's very casual when you're talking, but for them, that's giving what do you call it?
Using God's name in
Praise.
vain.
Yeah, that's praise to God. You actually, if you're not saying it in that vein,
Mm.
then it's considered sacrilegious, and it's so that kind of puts you back and like, wow, I have to be really thoughtful about my choices, and it can be done because this is their fifth season. I'm in their fifth season. They're already moving on and taping their sixth, and there is absolutely a market. And I love telling people who may not be brave enough to go to a comedy club because they like, oh, what am I going to hear? What's going on? Can I bring my mom? Or can I and I tell people, this is it, you're not going to hear Clutch the Pearls comedy like, oh my God. Right, no, you're just going to have fun.
Well, I love it, Leanna. And I am really drawn. I mean, I can handle all kinds of comedy, but I am actually drawn to clean comedy because I think it takes greater wit to do that. Because you're
Mm-hmm.
not relying on the surprising F bomb, which is really not so surprising, but you are
Right.
relying on the comic's wit. And
Mm-hmm.
you really do fill the bill. I'd love to share with our viewers a sample of your writing. Do you have something from your
Oh,
book?
I do. It was interesting flipping back through my book, and I would rewrite it. I think that's how we always feel.
We all
But there
feel
was
that way.
I wrote a story, and it actually someone asked me to do this, and it's what brings me joy. And I think your audience would appreciate this last paragraph. That's still a favorite of mine. I wrote that stand-up comedy has immersed me in the soup of human diversity. I have met people from many cultures, ethnicities, nationalities, economic backgrounds, and houses. I mean, we can't all be uh, in Gryffindor now, can we? And while our differences are way funnier than our similarities, it is the latter that is most important. Tragic farm accidents aside, we've each got 10 fingers, 10 toes, one head, one heart. We are an awesomely talented yet troubled little species that suffers from taking itself a tad too seriously. Luckily, I can help.
That's beautiful, Leanne. And
Thank
it
you.
really goes to the heart of the what underscores comedy to me, that laughter brings us together. And so now we're about to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more to Leighann Lord about her career in comedy, podcasting, and her process. So stay tuned, everybody. And we're back with our guest, Leighann Lord, author of Real Women Do It Standing Up. Now, comedian Brian Callen once said that stand up is the last bastion of free speech, in that he can say almost anything if you make people laugh.
Right.
So, what kind of uncomfortable topics does comedy allow you to dive into?
Oh goodness, and it's getting harder every day, it would seem. But it's always been difficult. There's always you're gonna brush up against the topic that makes people uncomfortable. Whether you're talking about dating or raising kids, how you raise your kids can be like, oh, you don't beat your kids, do you? Oh, absolutely. And in case you're worried, I don't have any kids, so don't make any phone calls, anybody. But for me, it's allowed me to talk about my parents, believe it or not. I mean, everybody talks about their family. They're but so many topics, and but what's different is what's actually going on in your home and your point of view. And I started talking about them more, not just from the point of, oh, these wacky people that raised me, but as they started to get older, and as they started getting a little sicker, and I found my involvement in their life increasing, and the role reversal that happened that began happening for us. And it was so, I don't want to say traumatic, but it was so different for me that I'm one of those people, and a lot of artists do this. We process what we're going through in life in our art. So whether you're writing about it or you're performing, and it started as me performing, telling these jokes on stage, because I thought I was the only one. And I was pleasantly surprised by the people who came up to me after my shows and were like, "Oh my gosh, your parents are hilarious. Let me tell you about my dad. Let me tell you about my mother-in-law. Let me tell you about my grandfather." Like all these stories started happening, or started coming to me, and I realized it wasn't just me. I even had people in the elder care industry say to me, "Thank you for talking about this in a way that doesn't belittle them or lower their dignity." And at the same time acknowledges, how hard it might be to be in that role of a son, daughter, caregiver. So I didn't know I was doing that. I just, I love them. I want to be respectful, but they're driving me crazy.
Well, Leighann, I think that what really makes you stand out is that you are, I think all comedians do this, good comedians, they're observers of life. But I think that you bring together the skill of being a very astute observer as you bring these things into your comedy. And you're a wordsmith. You have a beautiful way of expressing yourself. And in your book, Real Women Do It Standing Up, Stories from the Career of a Very Funny Lady, you're taking people on the journey of your rising career as a comedian. And
Mhm.
and now you bring up the jokes that you made about your parents have led you to this podcast now that
Mhm.
called People with Parents, and you call it compassionate comedy. And I think there's a vulnerability, a poignancy in stories that contrast with very, very funny moments. And, tell us a little bit about compassionate comedy and what people get from your podcast. How long does it last? How did you structure it? We can all relate.
Uh,
We all have parents.
yeah, well, yeah, I cast that net pretty wide when I said people with parents. I, it, someone sent me a comment, and they said they love when my podcast pops up in their feed, and they go, "Yay!" Oh. Because they want to hear it, but they know that there's gonna be some feels in there. So because it's not stand up, so there are funny moments, there are poignant moments, there are sad moments, and all through there, I try to be compassionate, and while still being honest and faithful to the stories. My dad used to say, when I was younger, he's like, "I've never had a little girl before." So he was making his way as a dad. And I turned around many years later and said, "I've never had an 80-year-old father before. And I'm making my way with that."
Oh,
That's the role reversal.
oh, Leighann, tell us about your mom and dad.
Oh my goodness.
Your mom's from, I think you had a post and you were it was so funny about discipline or something, I think. And your mom's from Jamaica,
my
or
mom's actually my mom's actually first generation. Her dad was from Jamaica. My
okay.
dad's side is from Barbados and Trinidad, but they're both first generation.
Mhm.
And Yeah, which means I'm second, which means I like beef patties, but only when they're mild. So but yeah, no, they've been married. They would have been married. Well, they made it to 60 years, 60 years married. And they just a loving, funny couple. And they weren't always funny on purpose. But
Well, I think that
um,
you just, the dialogue, those moments, the fact that you're grown and taking care of them, but they still see you as their little girl,
oh
which
yeah.
means sometimes they just dismiss what you have to say because what do you know?
Well, and I actually miss that in a way, that blissful ignorance of, they're in charge, and that was the painful part of the role reversal of okay, why am I now in the adult role? Like it started so randomly. My dad just offhandedly said to me, "Yeah, I'm gonna have surgery because I'm tired of peeing 5 times a night." And I was like, "What?" Excuse me? Who's doing surgery on an 80-year-old man's prostate? Like, what? I need some more information here, sir.
What's
You
happening?
know,
What's happening?
yeah, what's happening? So that's I feel that's how I got roped into the appointment rodeo. Like my whole calendar became balancing my travel schedule and performance schedule with their doctor's appointments because I couldn't not go. Because I found that we would go in and they would hear one thing and I would hear another. when the doctor's talking. And I think that's all of us,
All of
because
us.
it's your health, your issues. And so I walk out and go, no, no, that the doctor did not say you can have hamburgers. That is not what I heard at all.
You know,
So to go in and be their advocate and have the doctors see my face to know, no, 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 you're not gonna, just shoo them out of here. We're gonna deal with their real medical concerns. And just I turned into a mama bear, even though I didn't have kids. I'm like, how did this happen to me?
because you have a great love for your parents and it really shows,
Ah,
and you make it all so palatable with your sense of humor, and at the same time this, this very raw and visceral feeling of your bond with them. I think that what you do for a living, getting out in front of audiences, showing up all alone, to make people fall over laughing. I mean, that is quite a skill, even though you make it look so spontaneous on stage. And I don't know that even though I'm a stand-up comedy dabbler, I don't know that I could take a steady diet. As exhilarating as it is when the heavens open up and everybody laughs. But I'm really curious how you've trained yourself to stick with it, especially during times of personal crisis. I'm so sorry that your dad passed away, and I know that it is a deep wound, his loss.
oh,
and
very, very much
and
so.
and how, I mean, did you continue performing during that time? And
It's I love, first of all, I love that you say you're a dabbler. I absolutely love that. But it's not stressful for me. Performing it's what keeps me sane. Getting on stage is actually my safe space. It's the world off stage that I'm baffled by. I'm like, is this what we're doing? Is this adulthood? Everybody does this? Really? Every day? This is horrible. So performing is the thing that gets me through. And it's funny you asked me the question. My dad, when he passed away, it was a Tuesday, and I had a conference that I was scheduled to host, to MC, from that Thursday to Sunday. And I showed up Thursday, and they kept saying, Leighann, if you don't want to come, if it's too much. And I'm like, you don't understand. I have to be here. And I showed up that Thursday, and I got nothing but absolute love and support from them. It was the Northeast Conference on Science and Skepticism. Like, I had my manager walk up to me. He goes, I know there's nothing I can say. And he just hugged me. And I said, I just need to be here doing the work. And a part of it was, this is exactly what my dad would want me to be doing. He was supportive of me from day one of my career. Even before, when I sat down and I realized what I wanted to do, and I was nervous about telling my parents, I did the old divide and conquer thing. I said, let me tell my dad first, and I sat down and I said, Daddy, I want to do stand-up comedy. And he said, what took you so long? And from that moment, I mean, I was always supported, but he was my dad in comedy. A lot of comics who started with me remember him showing up to the clubs, being supportive, giving the kind of advice and support that they maybe didn't get from their parents. So he adopted a lot of comedy kids, and he was of the opinion, he didn't have a scarcity mentality. He thought the more love you give away, the more you get. So yeah, that's what gave me the strength to go, yeah, I'm still going to MC this conference, because that's exactly what my dad would have wanted. And
it's
it was
still
great.
an amazing feat. I remember years ago, the famous comedy duo Abbott and Costello, and they did that
Oh
Who's
yes.
on First.
Who's on first?
And I was
So
shocked to
classic.
find, yeah, it's classic. And yet I was shocked to discover that Lou Costello had heard about the death of his son just a few hours before that performance.
Oh
And it turned out to be one of the greatest performances you've ever seen. And yet
yeah.
what he was carrying at that moment, and I'm always in awe of people like him, like you, who can power through grief to bring others to laughter.
Well, I also have come to understand grief is not a one-time thing. It's not something you put on your calendar or check off your to-do list. It's something that you carry it with you, and you work through it over time. So yeah, were there moments I was absolutely curled up on my couch, unable to move? Yeah, for sure. Um, but I literally, the day he passed, I called the hospice people, because they had a little brochure and they said, yeah, you know, within a couple of months, we'll call you about grief counseling. I called them that day. I said, I need this today. Like, how soon can we start on this process? Because I've never been here before in this way. And I know I need help, and I don't want to put that off. But between that and regular counseling and being able to process it through my art and get on stage and be me, and doing stand-up lets you forget. You're immersed in yourself, and but you also can forget. It's a way to compartmentalize and to feel joy, to bring joy to people. Oh, you know, it's their
Right. The
laughter
heavens
is as
open.
healing. Yeah, no, it's as healing to give it as it is to hear it. Like, I performed 2 days after the World Trade Center. After 9/11, September 13th, I had a gig on my calendar, and I'm like, nobody's going to be there. And yet I went. I didn't call the club. I still went. I felt like I had to be there. And I'm glad I did, because there were people in the audience because they needed to be there. Like, we needed something, not that it was a funny event. It was because it wasn't funny that we needed a release. And I realized, okay, I'm not a brain surgeon. I didn't think I had a really important job, but maybe in some ways I do.
I agree. I think people like you are healers. As important as setting a broken bone, and I discovered that myself during 9/11 when I pulled a book by David Sedaris off my shelf and I laughed because I couldn't help myself.
Right.
And I think that to have a gift like that is a real healing ability. In the minute that we have left, how
Okay.
can we find out more about you and your work?
Well, my website, which I direct everybody to, is veryfunnylady.com, because my parents were having a very creative day when they gave me the spelling of my first name. And even if you really like me, you know, after you've had a couple of drinks at a club, you may not know how to spell that. So veryfunnylady.com is the portal to all things me. And that'll point you to my Twitter, my Instagram, my YouTube. You know, if you guys are on those platforms, follow me. I give great content. I think you will be entertained daily following me on social media.
That is for sure. And if please buy her book, Real Women Do It, Standing Up, Stories from the Career of a Very Funny Lady. Very Funny Lady being her website. And tune in to People with Parents. Leighann, you never disappoint. Thank you for being with us. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
being with us today.
Thank you, Suzette.
You just continue to bless everybody with your talent. And I just feel very fortunate to have you as a friend and a colleague. Be
Oh my
well,
goodness.
and
Thank you,
we'll
Suzette.
see you the next time. I'll see you at the next comedy show that you're headlining.
Thank you.
Until the next time, everybody, we'll see you. This is Suzette from It's All Right with Suzette signing off. Happy writing, everybody.